welcome to Beyond the Youth Room podcast. We're coming to you on site at the Gospel Advancing Ministry Summit in Oakland, California, and I'm joined with a friend of mine, Andy, and he's going to explain a little bit of his background in just a moment. But yeah, today we're going to be talking about the importance of having a lead pastor or your senior pastor on board with Gospel Advancing Ministry. And my buddy Andy here is a lead pastor at a church, and so he's going to share some of his contacts and how we can actually advance the gospel in youth ministry, how to go about that to get the whole church on board with that. So stay tuned for this episode. Now, Andy, I don't even know, we should have talked about this before because I don't remember when we originally met. I'm sure it was at a Dare to Share event.
Yeah, Dare to Share.
I think it might have been at one of the roundtable events.
It was
in the DC area.
It was in DC. Yeah. I was at your church. So I spoke at your church. It was for a Dare to Share one day.
One day, yeah.
Yeah, and so it was a 1 day event where it was basically a crash course of what you get maybe, let's say, in a week for students. But this is a training for leaders, for adult leaders, and it was basically a little bit more than a half a day. And so,
was that the same day that Don Olding was there?
Yeah. So I met you, and then I met Don Olding on the same day.
I do remember that day. Yeah, I remember that distinctly. Yeah.
So it's cool because both of you and Don, I've kept in touch with quite a bit since then. And then with Don now, just in a couple of days, I'll be speaking to lead the cause in Johannesburg.
That's awesome. And we had Don on Beyond the Youth Room from South Africa. So he's a brother from South Africa that's really doing some awesome stuff. But you've been over there several times now, right? You've
probably half a dozen at this point.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so tell us a little about
So I met him at your church. So it sprung board from that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I can take credit for that now.
You can.
Yes.
Okay. You should.
Well, now, so tell us a little about your background for the audience that may not know you personally like I do. So you're from Kenosha, Wisconsin.
Yes.
And that's been in the news the past few years a little bit.
It has.
Events, but
it has.
But you've been there for a long time. You've been serving in the same church. Tell us about your context now. What got you started there? How do we even know about this Gospel Advancing Ministry that we're partnered with now? Tell us about your background with that.
Well, yeah, it's amazing. Every one of our stories, it's never like what you think it's going to be, And so me being even in ministry is like, originally I went to college to be a meteorologist.
Yeah.
And then made the flip to the nearest Bible college, made the flip again one more time to college in the Chicago area, and got my degree and with ministry, and then became a youth pastor. Really felt called those initial days of going into youth ministry, and so I just went up the road in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which is right on the Illinois Wisconsin border. When we tell people that I'm from Wisconsin, they think I'm like up from the woods. Oh, I vacation there. No, you don't vacation in Kenosha. Kenosha, I would consider more part of the Chicago metropolitan area. It is, and so. So I started there in 2006 as a youth pastor, and I had previously, when I was in school, I did youth work in the inner city in Chicago, and so it was an extension, just continuing youth ministry. Yeah. And in 2007, that's when I went to our first Dare to Share conference, and it's funny because it was an accident how I went to Dare to Share. I had a friend call me up and said, "Hey, I'm going to this Dare to Share event. Are you going?" And he was assuming I was going. I was like, and I looked down at my trash, and there's the flyer for the event. And I'm like, I threw the flyer away, and now I'm not going. He says, "Oh man, come on, why don't you go?" Fine. And so I took about 6 students, and literally what they heard, just knowing the gospel, advancing the gospel, just flipped our youth group upside down. We're a youth group probably of about 15, but within a year and a half, it was broaching 100.
Wow.
And so. With regular 60, but you'd have those swoops in the peaks. So, and it really just began to just influence the church, and we worked with other groups in our city, and we really began to see student after student come to Christ. And so it was also a number of things happened during the 9 years I was youth pastor in Kenosha. We had a number of suicides that happened. And so that pushed us as student ministries in town from going from like kind of playing together like dodgeball. We would do see at the pole, but like, hey, let's pray together. Let's actually reach our schools together. So Youth for Christ was a great linchpin for all the youth ministries to get on the campus, reach their friends, And really, just today, even seeing somewhere where the adults are now, because they're adults now, is absolutely amazing. And so, many of whom are at my church, some are even on staff right now.
Yeah.
So, and so it's just amazing seeing, what student ministries can do when they get gospel centered. And so that's really kind of the petri dish of me becoming a lead pastor. And I really had to wrestle with that because the church at the time was like, hey, the pastor at the time was like, I'm going to retire. We'd like you to consider. And I really had to wrestle it out with the Lord. Like, do I want to stay in youth ministry? Because that was kind of going to be like this thing, like I could see myself doing this forever. Yeah. But as I just sought the Lord, I'm like, you know what? I think it is time to go in the lead pastor. I think it is. I am going to pursue this at the church, where I go from the youth pastor to lead pastor. And here's the reason why. Is because you can only go so far in student ministries if the whole church isn't gospel advancing. And I was really, really lucky because my pastor at the time, he really just he trusted me and he said, have at it.
Yeah.
Go and reach students. And so I'm really grateful that was his approach to ministry. He wasn't somebody who was micromanaging or like, give me a 15-minute status report. I remember I applied at a church prior to Kenosha, and part of it was, you'll be giving the pastor a 15-minute status report in the office. I thought, are you kidding? But they weren't kidding. So I didn't go there. But yeah, so I was really thankful for the senior pastor at the time, where he was like, hey, go and reach students in the community. And because of that, I had the freedom to do that. Now, obviously, I had to report and do all that stuff. I had bosses still, I had a board I still had to report to, but they really gave me that freedom, and I really that was a large part of the success of being able to go into the schools, reaching the students. So when I decided, hey, you know what, I'm gonna make a go for it. The church called me to be their next lead pastor. The reason being is that I want to see our church go from the youth ministry advancing the gospel, from the whole church advancing the gospel, elder board, lead pastor, every ministry working together to advance the gospel. And here's what will happen is, if the whole church understands it, the church is going to even more influence leaders and congregants to really honor and see the need for a robust student ministry or kids ministry. It's not going to be like this side thing. It's not going to be babysitting. It's not going to be like, oh, look, the youth are doing this, or they're going to the yearly camp or the yearly winter retreat. They realize, hey, you know what? If we don't reach these students now, the world's already reaching them. And by the way, that was 9 years ago. So there was no TikTok then. All right. So it's like that even more than ever. It's like the churches need to have a robust understanding of gospel advancing and a robust conviction that we have to reach the next generation now.
Yeah.
Like now. And if we're going to do that, that means we have to put all the eggs in the basket. And where we begin to reach our congregants is when they're born.
Yeah.
And so, but the reason why I'm passionate about even this now is like, okay, it's taken us 9 years now to move our church to get fully aligned. And I would say just now, are we getting fully aligned.
Yeah.
All right. If you can imagine, my church is 115 years old. Okay. If you can imagine that now, I mean, we've had a name change the last couple of years. Now people are finally understanding in each department, from board all the way down, what it means to be a gospel advancing church. And I think the best days are ahead. So it is a long haul. It is a marathon to get the church to understand what it means to be gospel advancing. And that's why I made that switch.
Yeah.
That's why I made that jump.
Well, and one of the things you were even sharing before, so like you went from having a lot of freedom in youth ministry to kind of own that world within your church, of course, under the governance of your
absolutely. It's not a silo.
Yeah, exactly. But then you went from that to working with adults, and one of our friends talked about this to you. It's like, why would you do that? And what was the analogy that you used to kind of describe that?
Well, I'm gonna go ahead and out him if that's okay. It's my friend. It's your friend, Doug Holliday. Yeah. So 9 years into the youth ministry, my church is like, hey, we'd like you to consider to be the lead pastor. So I'm telling the guys here at Dare to Share. So at this point, Dare to Share asked me to be a part of some projects. And so I'm in the mountains of Colorado. I'm excited to tell a few of these guys, hey, I'm going to be the next lead pastor in my church. And Doug Holliday, I thought would give me a high five, but instead he kind of took a couple steps back, looked down on the ground, kind of shook his head and said, what's the matter? Did I do something wrong? He goes, why would you do that? Yeah. I said, what do you mean? He said, Well, with youth ministry, it's like clay. And with adults, it's like cement. And you know what? He put words to something I was feeling and why it was like a tension from moving from youth ministry to lead pastorate, because the thing I absolutely loved about youth ministry is students, it's such a fertile ground to say yes to Jesus.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And with adults, it's like, it really is difficult. So he's like, you're moving from like, it's like clay to, have hard cement and you're going to need a jackhammer. And I had come to that point already. It's like, all right. How I responded to Doug was like, I'll be the one to operate the jackhammer.
Yeah.
Because we need churches to understand from the top down, it has to be gospel advancing, or our youth pastors are going to burn out.
Yeah.
Our youth ministries, they may be successful for a year or two, because the cyclical nature of youth ministries, you may have a good freshman class, sophomore class. You know what I'm saying? You may have a good couple years, and you can do that without the church having full support. But if you want a robust student ministries where we're not burning a pastor out every year and a half, right? And we're not seeing our students just quit youth ministry at 10th grade or 11th grade. If you want to reverse that, it can't just be the youth pastor and his team having that conviction. They need to be supported from the board and the pastor, not just understanding what they're doing, but modeling it and doing it as well in their areas of the church.
Great. And now what was a catalyst for you? So you actually had to make some hard decisions. You had to lead in very difficult times, like within your church, since you took leadership as lead pastor. And what's kept you from giving up? Like, what, I mean, like,
Yeah.
seriously, like what,
Yeah.
because you've been through so much,
Yes.
in the past. It's been 9 years, right?
9 years. Yeah. There's been ups. I mean, it's
And-
ups and downs. Yeah.
And so what keeps you motivated? Like, why not just throw in the towel? I mean, you're a talented guy. Why not just go do something else?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. You know, sometimes there's been seasons where I turn to my wife and I say, "Hey, like, what is there something else that we want to do? Is this it?" Like, and every time we're like, "Let's go to prayer," and it's not like a serious conundrum. It's like, no, the Lord's called us to this, and we realize it's not about the short term gains or the marathons. It's not. And I'll be honest, there has been heartbreak. There has been moments where someone's been walking with the Lord and they're not. There's people that leave your church. There's people that leave your team. And the thing is like, it's in the end, you're here by a call to reach people for Jesus Christ and to see them become lifelong followers of Christ. And that starts in the youth ministry and it continues the rest of their life. And so when you realize, okay, this is the long-term call, it's like, we can't throw in the towel. We can't. Like, it always goes back to the call.
Yeah. Yeah. So when it comes to having a youth leader out there that's maybe discouraged because he doesn't have the support of his senior leadership, doesn't have, maybe the right mentality, even from his senior pastor or lead pastor, what is some advice from their perspective? So, you're now in the role of a lead pastor. You're trying to be supportive of gospel advancement ministry throughout all of your church ministries. But what are some ways that you can encourage, or even maybe provide some questions to ask, or even some ways to go about how do you actually get a senior pastor on board with gospel advancing ministry when they may not be already? They're not necessarily opposed to it, like they're not opposed to the gospel,
right?
But, there's, because that'd be a different conversation.
Yeah.
But just ones that just don't really understand the philosophy behind it. They don't understand like why it's important, or to approach it that way. So what advice would you give to that person?
Well, and this goes back to the previous question that you had, like, how did we make it through the ups and the downs? And this is the number one thing I would say, just even going back to the call, but it's prayer. It's going to God and saying, God, I can't do this in my own strength. I need prayer to persevere and to be patient. And when God really answers that prayer and he fortifies you, and you look back a couple years later and you're like, I'm still standing, or like, God, you're giving me strength when I should be weak. That's when you know you're not operating on your flesh. That's when you know that I am crucified with Christ. It's therefore I no longer live. It's Jesus Christ living in me. And and when Christ is living through you, you actually get to offer what you can't offer yourself, and that's the gospel of Jesus Christ. Yeah. So that not only sustains you, but it helps you be patient with people on your team, or specifically to this question, a senior pastor or board that might not understand. And so even for me, even though I had a very supportive senior pastor when I was a youth pastor, there'll be times where I've had questions. There'll be times I wouldn't agree, and I would get worked up, and I'm like, you know what? Now I'm going to go to pray, and I would pray for patience. I'd pray for understanding. I pray to communicate well, and I would pray that I would never find myself to be a victim. Like, oh, woe is me, my senior pastor doesn't understand, or woe is me, they're not doing what I want. You know, when you go into woe is me, then it's hard for like, then the strategy goes out the window, and it's more of like, I'm doing this, they're not doing this, they don't care. Yep. And when I hear that in pastors a lot, I'm like, man, you got to recalibrate a little bit. Like I talked to one youth pastor and I said, when's the last time you had a conversation with your senior pastor? He's like, it's been a year. A year? It's like, man, get a lunch, man, get some coffee, share your heart. And I don't know how they were avoiding each other in staff meeting, but obviously there's something there.
Yeah.
And so it's like, make opportunity. Like your ministry's on the line here.
Yep.
And so if your pastor or board doesn't understand, make opportunity to, number one, befriend them as brothers in Christ. Yeah. But then secondly, like, share your heart, what's going on. You know, if they're not asking for it in your staff meeting of like, hey, what's going on? Or there's not understanding, or they're seeking understanding, or they're giving you arbitrary goals that isn't moving the needle forward. Yep. Take the opportunity for them to understand and then share, and even like start teaching, like, hey, this is what we're doing. Yeah. And can I like invite you into what we're doing and understanding, and then with that can come challenge then. Yeah. You know, I got to a point where there were times where there could be challenge, like, hey, I think our services need to be more, need to have more gospel, more evangelistic purpose. Yeah. And over time, they're like, okay, let's do this on a Sunday. I'm like, wow, how'd that happen? And it's because it was patience. Yeah. God answering that patience.
Well, and we know this too, like, title doesn't always equal influence, and vice versa. So like, just because you don't have a title of leadership, you know, over certain people in your church doesn't mean that you can't influence.
Right. 100%.
And I've noticed too, like, and this kind of goes to even how I was having a conversation with someone at the conference here today about, you know, parents that might push back on certain things.
Right.
And so to kind of find what you do agree on. So it's like, hey, we have the same motivation. We want to see kids impacted. Well, we want to see the gospel move forward. How we're doing this might look like this, you know, in this context. And ultimately, like, I'm going to stand before the Lord. Like, you never pull out that card like first, but it's like, ultimately, like, I'm going to stand before the Lord to answer for the actions that I do in this ministry. And I feel like this is what the Lord's calling us to do. And of course, that might be a harder conversation with your senior, but I was like, that's how I would address usually with parents. Yeah. And one of the things that I think we can often overlook is, just that power of prayer, and like for an understanding heart, and
prayer aligns your heart to just be patient with what the Lord's doing. And you know, because especially when you come to like the Gospel Advancing Conference or any conference that matter, like, you are souped up, you realize everything that's wrong with your ministry, right? Yeah. You know, some people, they get really motivated. Some people, they want to quit. You know, it's like, man, I've got like so many steps I have to, but the thing is that God is already at work, whether we know it or not. And so that prayer of patience really allows you to understand that I don't know everything, what's going on. And you know, it really gives grace to your senior pastor, wherever they're at. I mean, and to be honest, when you're in chair 2, when I was in chair 2, I didn't know half the complaints that they had heard. I didn't know that the pressures that maybe they had on the board. Yeah. And then when you get into chair 1, you're like, oh, okay. And so the last thing they need is a dagger going for them. Like, and so if you can go for the heart, say, hey, can I really explain? And hey, I think this would be really important for all of church, or for all of ministry, you know, whatever the context is. And this is, I think you're hitting on something though here. Like, there's a live wire here, because when I've come to Dare to Share over the last decade, there have been a lot of people through the rotating door. Okay. A lot of people, where I remember there was people that was on this, we would call it the Gospel Advancing team, you know, the council. And I remember our first year that we did it, I want to say
there's a huge amount of that.
Yeah, you were there.
Yeah.
So
and you were the one that pointed this out.
There's like half. Yeah, half are either at a new church the next year because they quit and got upset. Some were fired, and so they're in between looking for it, or some are on the verge of being fired. Yeah. And so they're getting souped up with like, we need to advance the gospel. We need to reach our students. We need to get in the schools. Yeah. Our church stinks. You know, not everybody would say that, but some would. Yeah. And what would happen is they would go and they go all guns a-blazing. And I understand this. I did this myself at times. And then you get really discouraged. Like, why doesn't anybody else care? Yeah. You know? And what ends up happening is you can, instead of trying to win people over and to understand, like, hey, you could be a real asset for the kingdom of advancing the gospel, you kind of look at them as like the enemy. And they're not. You know, a lot of people will, if you give them time, they will come on board. Some people won't, and some people will leave your church for it, but we don't want to be cavalier with that. Yeah. You know, I think there could be a lot more youth pastors making making the longevity. They could be going, instead of 1 year or 2 years and they're gone, they could be on year 7 or 8 if they look at the long game and look at investing in their senior pastor and their board with gospel advancing.
And now, how many years were you youth pastor at your church?
9.
9 years.
Yes.
Oh, so you were there for 9 years, and then it's been another 9 years?
It's been another 9.
You've been there for 18?
18 this fall.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
it's a long haul.
Yeah. So when it comes to even that kind of long-term impact in the same context or the same vein of ministry, you really did like have the long haul ministry like before you even saw the real hard changes, even with
I mean, if you would have told me when I came on board there, I was like, oh, I'll be here about 3 years. And then I'll go on to something else. And then the senior pastor, I'd really like year 5. So you can see a whole classroom. Like, okay. Yeah. But then you start really wrestling with like, well, wait, what's the long-term call? Yeah. And sometimes guys don't know that. Yeah. Sometimes you have people that go into ministry, they don't know, like, how long are you going to be here? I don't know. Yeah. And so, but that's where I realized, nope, there's work to be done. There's work to be done.
Which that actually reminds me, because some of the something that the Lord's been teaching me recently is just like, long suffering or like, patient endurance. Yeah. And what was fascinating was, so, I'm part of a multi-site church, and we came together to plan like our camp theme, camp breakout sessions for the summer. We recently had a staff meeting with all locations, and so the way that we did it as our content team was just like, okay, let's like write down things that we're struggling with ourselves. Like the Lord's teaching us this. Write down things that we think students are struggling with that we want to address, things that have to do with our theme, things that students would say that is a problem, and just see if there's any themes. So we all like wrote down things and we put them up on sticky notes, like all up on the wall. And what was fascinating was there were several people, even from our own, like just youth ministry staff at our church, that had patient endurance, long suffering.
Yes.
And I was
steadiness.
Like, I was like, oh my goodness, like we're all, and like none of us had even known that we're all like, it's like not like we're talking about it all the time. But I think for the youth leader out there that's really like struggling because of this topic of like, man, my church doesn't feel like they're on board. Mm-hmm. I would say, and I can say this too from experience too, that like because I've been in the same context of ministry for 16 years now.
Wow,
and
that's awesome.
And so with it, I think there's so much value in waiting, like not jumping ship too early.
Yes.
Before you see some of the change that you're praying for. And so when we think of like, we're just an impatient people. Like I think even Greg says it this way. He says we're a microwave people serving a crockpot God. And, and so, And when it comes down, and like when we look at scripture, it's like, Joseph in slavery for 22 years before he was elevated to a position of power.
Yes.
So you look at Jesus' ministry, 30 years for 3 years of public ministry.
Yes.
So 30 years prep, 40 years in the desert for Moses. So God is fulfilling even promises over several generations, not just like, oh, we'll just have to wait a few years to see. It's like, no, your kids will actually experience the answer to this prayer.
Yes, like, generational.
And
absolutely.
So God's timeline is so beyond us that I think we're so impatient. And the same thing goes with ministry. Is like, just because things are hard right now doesn't mean that it's always going to be.
Right.
But also patiently endure. Like, God could be developing you and forming you into in just ways that you would not imagine. And so I think we can both speak from experience, just like being steady in one ministry for that long has really helped us to see like, okay, the Lord can change things over time. And so it's good.
Yeah. And I think for some people, like they may only be called to a place for a couple of years, but I really think there's something about God raising up a generation of youth workers or pastors or whatever department they're in the church to be there for a longer haul. And when people do go, because like, for instance, when some people were fired or some people went all guns a-blazing, like there really needs to be an honorable way. We're living in a culture right now that are just so angry, and we're living in a culture right now that are just like, I'm going to tell you off because I'm right.
Yeah.
And man, I'll tell you what, there needs to be, even if you are moving, like if you're listening and you're moving from one ministry to another, like please do that in honor.
Yeah.
Because it's a long range. You are departing and you're setting up your now successor for success or failure, depending upon how you leave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that was like through that lens, I've heard recently, like, you can seek to be heard or to be helpful.
Right.
And so you got to kind of discern that if you do need to bring up something or if you do need to leave, do so honorably, of course. But don't just have the goal of being heard, but like
Right.
have the goal of like even that little subtle change of like, hey, I just want to be helpful so that this doesn't keep happening, or like if I felt hurt, like this is why I was hurt, but then this is how we come with a solution, not just the problem. And so now let's why don't you address the the senior pastor, lead pastor that has a youth pastor, youth leader that's leading gospel events and youth ministry that doesn't quite understand. Maybe even this clip, the youth leader watching could just send to their senior pastor and say, hey, take a look at this from a lead pastor's perspective. What advice would you give to a lead pastor, senior pastor, to help support youth ministry in their church advancing the gospel?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the best ways to do it is get involved with gospel training. I would say church wide. So it's not just on your youth pastor. Like, hey, I'm going to teach you, how evangelism or gospel advancing, philosophy here at the church. Just you haven't been doing good. I think it needs to be, first off, all, like, everybody down to the janitor. They understand if somebody, it comes into the church, doesn't know Christ, the janitor could lead them to Christ, But as far as like, okay, I'm having a one-on-one, hey, here's our next 3 months, 9 months, 12-month goal. Again, this is a plug for Greg Steer, but I can't think of any other youth organization that is going to equip youth pastors and youth workers as well as what Dare to Share does. Also, Sun Life does a great job as well. And so, but Greg Steer, through the Dare to Share, through the GOSPEL, the Ask Him I Remit, the different tools that they have for youth pastors, that the conferences, it really will have your team, have your youth pastor understand. So, for instance, youth pastor that's serving with us right now, he's been with us for 2 years, and I remember his like aha moment. It was at last year's Gospel Advancing Summit, and Greg was giving a talk that if you've been in the Dare to Share world for a while, like it's something everybody will hear. It's the Letters from Hell talk, right? And so, but Greg had retooled it a bit, and it cut everybody to the heart that night, including a youth pastor. And he was just like, man, this is so amazing. And he has been like he was on fire before, but like it just sunk in. Yeah. And now it's like, it's creating an atmosphere where it's really becoming irresistible for students to come in and not just be at youth group, but to understand they're on mission. And so it is connecting with an organization like Dare to Share, or giving them tools like what Dare to Share offers, and just really kind of bake that into some of the expectations. All right. And then say, okay, when we have goals, like, I would really like to hear new conversion growth that's happening in youth ministry. I'd like to know ways that you're equipping your students to get on their campus and make disciples, and who make disciples, right? Yeah. And that everything that we do, whether it be our winter retreat or an event on, a special event, where is going to be the element where the gospel is going to be advanced? It's not, it really moves you from like, hey, I'm having this inward season where we're just all enjoying to one another, which is good. At least the enjoyment part, right? To where it's like, you know what? We're going to open the door. We're going to go from being close-fisted, this is our group, this is our club, to, you know what? We are opening ourselves up to the entire community. We are going to see this group of 12, 30, 300, whatever the student number is. We are going to have this amount of students go into the schools, and the schools are going to be different because the students have been equipped, and the students are owning their faith, and they're inviting people into. And so I think that just creating goals to be able, you can actually see that happen is really important.
Which is one of the values, right? Biblical outcomes measure,
right?
And even that bold vision of like, setting some tangible goals with
right.
That. And so let's shift gears a little bit, because I have some interesting facts about you that you may not know that I know.
All right.
So you apparently are into sodas.
Yes, I am.
You collect sodas?
Who told you that?
I'm not going to say my source. All right. But you collect sodas.
I do.
And do you have like a wall of them, or like what does that mean? Like,
well, I used to. Yeah. I used to like collect sodas for like, I display them in my office, and then I found out there's crazier people out there that like to buy them. And so I have slowly shifted my collection over to my kids.
Yeah.
But there's some that are just way too valuable. And so, and it's gotten into a little crazy zone here. My wife calls it crazy zone, but there's some ROI, there's a return investment that she allows me to continue to do it. Yeah. So I have my old stuff, and you want to take a guess at what I sold one of the cans for?
So I don't even know. Are they all in cans or is it bottles?
Some are
too?
cans, some are bottles.
Okay,
Yeah.
so cans, and then like, what are we talking like? Are these like
The
regular sodas, but like collector edition?
regular
or something?
sodas, or maybe they've been out of market.
Like a Super Bowl champ.
I have a
Coke or
refrigerator in my basement that keeps them good. And so, so my oldest can right now is from 1997. My oldest bottle is probably from the 50s, sealed.
Wow. Okay. So then you're asking, so now are these like a common brand soda, like Coke?
Yeah, this
like
Mountain Dew. I have the Hillbilly bottle. Yeah, all that. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not like these off the brand or off
Not
the wall.
not
like,
typically. Sometimes there is a place in Oklahoma, to the Oklahoma, people.
Okay.
There is it's called Pop Soda Shops right outside of OKC.
Okay.
Sometimes they have like the grass flavored or dirt flavored soda. I have a few of that, but I don't really collect a lot of that.
Yeah. Okay, so then these are name brand sodas that just happen to be special editions or special years, whatever.
Or they're out of print.
Okay. All right. So
production.
your question was, what do I think one of them was worth?
Yes.
And this was just
I sold
one
it.
can?
One can. One 12-ounce can.
Okay, one 12-ounce can. All right. I'm going to guess, I don't know, $100?
I've sold many at $100 higher.
Wow. Okay. I mean, like $500? Like, that
Close. Actually, yeah, 500.
500.
It was a Dr. Slice. One can for $500. Yeah.
For $500.
Yeah, that's a high.
And who buys this? Like, is it like on eBay?
Yeah,
like?
somebody that collects it buys it.
Wow.
And it's so those are like some old ones. Like some of them have to be from the 90s, or you have to sit on them for maybe 5 to 10 years. But Mountain Dew is usually the big one. Dr. Pepper fans, and maybe sometimes Pepsi. You get outside of that, they don't really sell. But yeah, I have funded Disney World by soda.
Wow, by selling soda.
Yes. So we went to Disney World recently, and that was all bought by soda money.
Wow.
That's right. In fact, I was at Disney World, and one of the sodas exploded in the mail, and I got a message of someone really angry. He's like, "It exploded. What are you gonna do about this?" And I had like my last one I was gonna give my kids their collection. I'm like, "Sorry, kids, got to send this off." It was a Mountain Dew Sagrita Blast. It was a Mountain Dew brand they had maybe 10 years ago. It was like a Taco Bell exclusive. They put it in a can for like 6 months and sold it for.
Now, is there like an online forum or like how do you know about this stuff? Like, where do you go to do your research?
I didn't.
You just know.
No, I remember back in Zanga, the days of like the blogs.
Yeah.
So that was like right in the MySpace era. That's when I started selling them, was like on a Zanga. I had Kenny Chesney buy a Mellow Yellow from there. And yeah, that's the most famous person.
You've sold soda to Kenny Chesney.
Yeah, his road agent. Yeah, he has it before every show. Apparently, yeah. I don't know that.
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess the guy could have said it was Kenny Chesney's manager, but that seems really random.
Weird,
yeah. So, but yeah, so I started there, and then before Allison and I, my wife, we were married, I'd fund a lot of our dates on soda. Wow. And so I've just been doing this since I was for about 20 years. And so you just kind of like figure it out.
Yeah.
And
so are you still buying new soda?
Yeah. So what I do is whenever they come out with the soda brand, I buy 2 of them, two 12-packs, and I sit on it for about 4 years, and then they're worth about $50 a can, and people buy them.
Wow.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
I feel bad.
Now, have you ever bought one of the more expensive ones?
Me personally?
So I mean, like, what's the most for one can of soda? Yeah.
I have spent, I want to say it was $20. I paid, no, not even that. Maybe $9 for a Mountain Dew that I wanted to try. It was called Mountain Dew. It was a honeydew. It was called honeydew. It was a honeydew, and it was like $9 a bottle. That was my splurge. But no, I don't. Yeah, you're not. It doesn't. It's not reciprocal. I remember I was like, I'm getting out of this, and so I started selling them, and so now when I buy them in the stores, it's more to just like, hey, I can actually make money on this. Yeah. And so it's not a lot. It's enough to pay for a portion of a vacation, not even a full vacation. It's not like this lucrative thing like, oh man, I'm going to quit my job, and someone could hear this and say, I'm going to go into soda selling. Like, no, it's you might get your Disney tickets paid for, or if you want to go to the World Series or something. I don't know.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, that's a world that I did not know existed that I do now. Yeah. Now I did know, so what I was fascinated by is like the old soda, like soda fountains and stuff. Uh-huh. So like I've heard like older generations like explain that like whole culture, like how, I mean, it was like in pharmacies and stuff. Yeah. And are you familiar with that kind of stuff, or is it mainly just the cans?
It's just the cans. Yeah. It's just the cans. We do have I don't know if it was a pharmacy, but my hometown in Indianola, Iowa, they do have a place called the Corner Sundry, and if you're ever passing that town, I don't know why we would if you're just passing through. Yeah. They do have the old soda fountain. Yeah, and I didn't really get into that,
Well,
just
that was like when they actually put like
they would put it in the glass.
and they put
Not Coke.
cocaine
Yeah.
in. Like Coca-Cola was cocaine.
Yeah. I guess they did do that.
And so it was like, oh, you have the flu? Here's a Coke.
Yeah.
It was like
Way before our time.
cure
Yes.
for every
Yes.
disease.
Yeah.
It was like,
And it's like
just drink a Coke.
the more you know why they call it
Yeah.
Coke, right? Yeah. Anyway, isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. So I'll have to remember that. Now
You can, by the way, you can still see the bottle with that, with the original ingredient at the Coke Museum in Atlanta.
Really?
Yeah, they do have it there.
And now you said that in the
At least the ingredient list.
you have a bottle that's from the 50s, and is that Coke?
No, it's Mountain Dew.
Okay.
Yeah, I still have that. Yeah.
And is that worth a lot, or is that not even?
I'd imagine it would be. I imagine it's probably a few $100s. Eventually you just like, okay, this one's gonna hurt a little bit. I've had this in the collection a bit, but it's like, I'm gonna sell it.
Yeah.
It's
fascinating. All right, a couple rapid fire questions that I want to ask. Okay, so favorite Bible translation?
I've
Like the one that you use the most.
Well, I use the CSB on Sundays.
Okay.
I do like the ESV. I grew up on the NASB.
Yeah.
But I like the NLT. If you want a dynamic equivalent, I love the NLT. A lot of my professors at Trinity help translate that.
Yeah. All right. So, Coke or Pepsi?
Pepsi.
Really?
Yeah.
Is it because of Mountain Dew?
No, I like Pepsi Twist. I've always liked Pepsi, but I will drink Coke. And Coke out of the glass bottle, I think still the winner. And the best fountain soda is Coke from McDonald's.
Really?
Yeah, they do it different.
Why?
It's just McDonald's. There's I think there's an article on it. I think it's something how they do with like their temperature.
I've heard that too.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah. Okay. So then, if you were going to live anywhere outside of the country of America, where would that be?
Where would I live outside of America? I always considered London my second home outside of it. Whenever I'm traveling third world, it's like when I land in London, I feel like I'm home. So, but I don't know if I'd want to live in London. I mean, I like visiting there. Probably, let's do London, Ontario, Canada, because then I'm close to the United States.
There you go. Okay. All right. And then if you could live in any other state besides Wisconsin.
Oh, I mean, Iowa is the Lord's country. All right. So Iowa. I grew up in Iowa. Yeah. So I was wonderful.
Iowa, and I mean, like,
it's wonderful.
No complaints, but that's not what I was.
I mean, people call it drive-through country, but the reality is like it's wonderful. I mean, it is. The people there, they're very courteous. I mean, they're courteous everywhere, but like it's hard to explain until you go and live there for a bit. And so I miss Iowa, but I'll tell you, like, probably the places I like visiting the most are like, I like Florida. I like the desert Southwest.
Like Arizona.
Yeah.
Utah.
Yeah. I mean, I like that.
Yeah. So I actually went, I'm a huge American Pickers fan. And I went through and stopped at
that's in
LeClaire,
Iowa. Yeah.
Right on the Mississippi. And so I've been to their shop there. And
just watch out for that speed camera right there.
Yeah.
It's the only one. It's the only one in the United States on I-80. Right there, right by the American Pickers.
Okay.
They pick you off right there. Yeah.
Good to know. Good to know. All right. Well, that concludes our episode. And I want to thank Andy for joining us today and all the valuable wisdom that he offered us today. So thank you so much for joining us. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe so that we can get seen by even more people. If you find our content valuable, please just let other people know. That's the biggest thing. You can always check out edgeclub.org/training for our free student missionary training. And then we also have a free resource vault as part of that too, for some of the resources that we talk here on the podcast. So thanks for tuning in today.